Good morning. Seems like we were just here recently. I am State Representative Jonathan Steinberg, the House Chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, and we are here today for something I've been looking forward to for some time, which is for all of us to learn about how we can further enhance the grid that we have and the grid that we need to have going forward. Innovation and investment in technology is critically important for the state of Connecticut and for all of us. Technology changes rapidly, making the right investments on the right time frame are a challenge for all of us. But I, for one, am very excited to learn today from people who are heavily invested in this space and can offer us some perspectives. We brought together some real heavy hitters here. And I think that not just those of us in this room, all the people of Connecticut can benefit from what we're going to be talking about today. And I should just add, this is just the beginning of this conversation. It's to help us get a perspective. It will certainly inform some of the legislation we talk about going forward. I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Senator Needleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few words. Special thanks here to Representative Foster, who's really made this a mission. Took it on as vice chair last year. I joked around with Jonathan and I said, I have two vice chairs. I don't think anybody else has two vice chairs because Jamie did such a yeoman's job. She was in every meeting and she's very much invested in energy and our energy future. And we're sad to lose her as vice chair, but she's got her own committee to chair and she's still on the Energy and Technology Committee. And I'm looking forward to this forum. So thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
I'm going to break protocol for a moment and turn to Representative Foster for some comments before I hear from our ranking.
Thank you, chairs. I really appreciate you keeping attention on this topic. I am grateful and excited about the opportunity that grid enhancing technologies or GETs offer. And so I'm grateful to the rest of the committee for giving a little bit of attention to these topics. My constituents, and I think every one of our constituents around this table, demand that we don't leave a single stone unturned when it comes to considering ways to reduce cost, increase capacity and stability of our grid, and support clean and green initiatives. And in that thread, GETS is sort of this broad term for software and hardware improvements to the grid that can support perhaps affordability, which is a really important topic we go into in this session. And there are some studies that show that grid enhancing technologies can actually offer an LCOE, which is like a levelized cost of efficient energy improvement to some of our green investments, making them on par with affordable coal plants. So they can be affordable and they can reduce costs and they can be deployed very quickly. That being said, under our current schema in Connecticut, when you consider deploying GETs, the level to which a grid enhancing technology is deployed and the benefit that you then correspondingly may glean is dependent on a lot of factors that might be outside of the general populace's control and certainly out of the cognizance of our committee's control. And my hope moving forward, my goal in this upcoming session is to make sure that we're deploying the potential of GETs as effectively as possible to give our constituents the best potential benefit in both a quick deployment and increasing reliability and decreasing cost of our grid. We have a lot of required transmission improvements that are going to be necessary across the country and certainly in the state of Connecticut moving forward. And I think our constituents cringe when we say things like that because they hear dollar signs and they are rightfully worried. And we all should be thinking about that. And we should not leave a single stone unturned. And we should really think about how we can deploy these hardware and software improvements to get the most possible benefit of every possible policy lever as we ask our EDCs to deploy technologies moving forward. And so my hope is that we're going to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck in every ask that we put forward, in every way that we might deploy GETs. And I'm grateful for everyone for being in this room and having these conversations today. And I am excited and adequately geeky for the day. So thank you.
Yeah, this is a geeks only meeting. We'll turn to Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining to educate me and others on an important topic. So I look forward to learning a lot today.
Representative Mara.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Foster, for putting this together, and I'm looking forward to learning today. Thank you.
So without further ado, since we have a lot we want to talk about, why don't we do a quick round of introductions around the table, make it as brief as we can, because everybody's going to get a chance to speak at greater length. We'll start right here.
Good morning, folks. I'm Jeremy McDermott from the National Business Association of Clean Energy Companies, known as Advanced Energy United.
Good morning. I'm Kat Burnham, also with Advanced Energy United.
Good morning. I'm Katie Dykes, Commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm Claire Coleman, the Consumer Counsel and Agency Head for the Office of Consumer Counsel.
Morning, everyone. Dave Arconti, Interim Commissioner, Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority.
Morning, everyone. I'm Zach Zimmerman. I am a Research and Policy Manager at Grid Strategies, which is a transmission consulting firm.
Good morning, Bob Manning, Program Director, Clean Energy Policy for Avangrid.
Good morning, all. Jacob Lucas, Vice President of Transmission System Planning at Eversource.
Morning, everyone. Senior Vice President of Engineering at Eversource. I'm Diganto Chatterjee. Thank you.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Theodore Paradise. I'm the Chief Policy and Grid Strategy Officer for CTC Global.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Berkowitz, Strategy and Technology Leader for Beckart. So we involved in technology manufacturing for the last 20 years. And I'm excited to share some case studies that will help the Connecticut grid.
Thank you all. And the other people you see here I didn't recognize are just members of the committee. They don't really matter that way. Before we get into the agenda proper, I'm going to ask Jeremy to sort of pick up on where Representative Foster left off in framing our conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Representative. And thank you very much to the committee, particularly the chairs, for organizing this day and organizing this conversation. Representative Foster has been a steadfast advocate and curious geek, as it were. And I think we're excited for this day because it is an opportunity to have a conversation around what can work for the Connecticut grid and for the New England grid. What are these technologies doing? What can they do? How do we get it right in a time where load growth and sensitivity around cost are going to be front and center for all states? How can advanced transmission technologies like GETs and advanced conductors make a difference in how we get our energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed? And so today we've structured this day as I believe the committee has structured this day to hear from Connecticut leaders, Katie Dykes, Commissioner Dykes, Council Coleman, and Commissioner Arconti, to talk about what is front and center and in the needs for the Connecticut grid. And then my colleague Kat Burnham is going to transition to an industry conversation with our friends from the utilities, from some service providers, and from Zach from the consulting firm to talk about what these technologies look like in the real world and how they might leverage themselves in the Connecticut grid. With that, I will turn it over to our chairs to kick us off. Thank you.
Well, I'd almost hate to interfere with the run you're on here. So if you're okay, I'd love to delegate to you sort of the moderating role in this sense and get our three panelists off for our first group.
Fair enough, Representative. And our next three speakers need no introduction, so I'm just going to hand it over to Commissioner Dykes. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. So delighted to be here. And again, thank you for convening us on this really important topic. I maybe will use the few minutes here for my opening remarks to give some context for why this topic is so important. We know that advanced transmission technologies are a broad category of technologies that encompass grid enhancing technologies, or GETs. So if you want to write your acronyms down, right now is a good time, as well as high performance conductors, ATTs, that that's the advanced transmission technologies, can cost effectively increase the capacity and the efficiency and the reliability and the safety of power lines faster than traditional infrastructure and at a lower cost or with higher net benefits. Some of the examples of grid enhancing technologies that we might be hearing about today include dynamic line ratings, which is hardware or software that can be used to calculate the true capacity of transmission lines using real-time and forecasted weather conditions so we can more optimally flow power over existing transmission lines. Advanced power flow control, that's again hardware and software that's used to reroute electricity from overloaded transmission lines to underutilized lines by adjusting circuit impedance. Topology optimization, which would be software that identifies reconfigurations of the transmission grid to deliver power most efficiently. So this is sort of the what, right, in terms of advanced transmission technologies. But I want to talk a little bit about the why of why this is so important. Here in this room, we know we're just kicking off the legislative session, and if you've read the paper, we anticipate that electricity and the cost of electricity is going to be a significant topic. And Governor Lamont yesterday in his State of the State address, spoke to the importance of trying to achieve more affordable and reliable and clean energy supply. So this conversation here, I can locate within, that really, really important topic that we're excited to engage on at DEEP. Transmission, the bottom line is that we need more of it. We are going to see over the next 10 years, according to the ISO New England's projections, that the New England region will have demand for electricity increasing by about 17% in the summertime and by 32% in terms of winter peak. So this is uncharted. Well, I won't say uncharted, but it's it's new, a new trend for us. Relatively, because over the last decade plus, we've been in a situation of pretty flat load growth. So we need to get access to more energy supply in order to support the integration of electric vehicles and heat pumps, which consumers are taking up with increasing frequency, but also to support a growing economy. Our manufacturing sector, for example, is expanding and needs more power supply. The growth of AI and the potential for integrating data centers into our region is also another important load growth opportunity that we need to be prepared for. So we need more sources of energy supply, and transmission investment is critical in order to accomplish that. So as we need to build out more of it, that means that we need to achieve the greatest or derive the most value from the existing grid that we have, that we can, and that's where GETS can help. And we need to ensure that new transmission builds are also incorporating these technologies. I don't have to also remind folks in this room that siting transmission from a permitting and community acceptance, a standpoint can also be a challenging task. We think about the DEEP just issued our Siting Council report that the legislature had requested. We know folks in the Fairfield County area are familiar with some of the more recent outcry or response to reliability transmission upgrades. So again, think about this conversation in terms of GETS and advanced transmission technologies as something that can help us build better the first time and try to avoid having to overbuild the transmission system, which can even prompt more need to go through siting processes that can become challenging. Just to say a little bit more about transmission expansion, we know that there's several different types of transmission expansion that can help us access greater energy supply options in the region. One is interregional transmission lines. And by interregional, what I'm talking about are lines that would connect New England with its Canadian neighbors, with New York, and even further south into New Jersey and beyond. New England and New York currently have 2,000 megawatts of transmission ties or interconnections between our grids. And these connections help us to trade power back and forth at times that can be optimal from a reliability standpoint as we think about more renewable, variable renewable resources coming online. That also helps us. There can be economic and reliability advantages from being able to flow power more easily across two grids. And so expanding these connections, these interregional connections, by roughly 1,000 megawatts has the potential to create between $137 and $189 million in cost savings annually that could be shared between New York and New England, according to one of the DOE lab studies. So this is one example of the type of new transmission investment that could provide significant benefits, including to resiliency. And so as we think about how to move those kinds of investments forward, we know that advanced transmission conductors can play a role in helping to achieve this transmission expansion. Another example of interregional another category of transmission investment that can help us meet our growth in energy demand is intra-regional. And so I'm really excited to amplify some of the work that we've been doing at DEEP and with our sister New England states to help finally support an RFP for public policy transmission investment. It's just been sort of this truism that the states could never agree on how to split the check when it comes to dividing up the costs on new transmission needed in the region to meet to integrate more energy supply options to meet various states' public policy goals. But actually, our states came together and on a bipartisan basis reached an agreement on cost allocation. And that's because I think there's a broad recognition now that integrating various resources that meet different public policy goals of different states and state legislatures, these projects do provide reliability benefit to all of the participating states. And to the extent that they do, all 6 states have agreed that we should be sharing in the costs. And so we were able to get FERC approval for a tariff that embeds that cost allocation formula. And now we have asked the ISO New England to run an RFP so that we can leverage competition to have developers propose projects that can help unlock some congested parts of our grid to help speed access to more energy supply. So that is something that's ongoing, and we have a particular focus in this first of a kind RFP on northern Maine, where we know that we've known for a long time that there's very low cost onshore wind resources that could be accessed and so this is 6 states going forward to explore and hear from developers with ISO's assistance on what the cost of those projects might be. But again, this is where we want to ensure that through that competitive process that we're getting the benefit of advanced transmission technologies incorporated into the design of any projects that might be responsive. So I'll also say that as I've just given you 2 categories of transmission investment needed to access new sources of energy supply. But we also need to keep an eye on the more traditional types of transmission investment that our ratepayers are paying for. And that includes new reliability transmission upgrades that are sort of the bread and butter of a lot of the work that our transmission owners, AKA our utilities, I know we have many who are here present today, are making in order to support the reliability of the grid. In addition, we have another category of transmission investment that has been growing in recent years, and that's asset condition projects. We have a very uh, aging grid. When we think about the lifespan of some of the transmission lines that are serving customers in New England today, some of them are getting a little long in the tooth, and understandably need to have some capital investment and upgrade in order to ensure that they continue to operate reliably. And this is increasingly important as we see the effects of extreme weather events impacting all of our energy infrastructure. So it's not surprising that these types of asset condition projects are becoming more and more of a driver of investment. But that said, when we talk about these types of more traditional transmission investments, I will say it's very, very important that we have adequate oversight of these investments so that consumers can be assured that there is a need for these projects and that the costs involved are prudently incurred. And so oversight, when I say oversight, there's lots of different strands of what oversight can mean, but I'm really talking about transparency, ensuring that consumers and state policymakers and legislators can be informed about the need and the extent of these projects, the cost of these projects, as well, so that we can feel just as confident as our transmission owners do about that these dollars are well spent. And it's also this kind of transparency, enhancing this transparency can also be an opportunity for us to verify that the transmission owners are integrating wherever cost effective and possible the grid enhancing technologies that you'll be hearing about today that can deliver so much value for the grid and for ratepayers. So just to give a few facts about why this is so important, the transmission portion of the bill represents roughly 11% of the average residential ratepayers bill, but we've seen a 72% increase in that the cost of that bill component since 2015. And that's related to reliability investments as well as about 40 to 50%. I'm sure that the utilities will make sure that I've got that figure accurate of that increase is associated with asset condition projects. So this is why we think it's so important to ensure that there are transparency mechanisms to help us verify what those projects are involving and how those dollars are being spent. So we have so many wonderful speakers today, so I will just stop there. But hopefully this has set the stage a bit, and look forward to being part of the dialogue.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think, as you indicate, every decision we make around energy has a consumer impact, and we need that energy. We need that energy badly, but we also need to produce it and transmit it in an efficient manner. And so, Claire.
Thanks very much for setting the stage there. I absolutely 100% agree. Of course, consumer impacts and interests are at the heart of all of these discussions we have here in this room with the Energy and Technology Committee. And I do think it's really appropriate to start off the session talking about GETS as a driver and a way to achieve some of the grid modernization and investments we need in the most cost-effective way. Just by way of introduction, my office, the Office of Consumer Counsel, represents the interests of consumers, not just here in the state at the Public Utility Regulatory Authority and here in the legislature. We are also a voting member of NEPOOL, the advisory body to ISO New England, and do really important work representing Connecticut customers at the regional level, so that transmission planning and infrastructure is particularly important to those discussions, as well as increasingly doing more work at FERC and supporting efforts to increase transparency and oversight of transmission costs. To Commissioner Dyke's point, I think we do have to level set that transmission and distribution costs are still a significant driver of customer rates. taking together distribution and transmission for Eversource customers, it's about 40% of bills, and for UI customers, it's about 47%. So while we are in a pivotal moment here where we are meeting challenges of climate change and storm, increased destructive storms, and also needing to meet the demands of increased load and recognize that a lot of important investments need to be made. We need to make all of those investments cost effectively, and we need to continue to ensure that every single dollar put towards capital investments are those that are going to benefit customers most. And I do think that, while energy infrastructure investments will continue to be necessary, and I want to make clear that we do believe that certain investments are beneficial to customers and are going to increase reliability, safety, the ability to integrate new, clean, local energy resources into our grid. These are all important aspects of long-term grid planning that we all need to come to the table with and talk about transparently and with data. And I do think GETS should hopefully unite all of us here in this room, right? Katie talked about some of the specific technologies, but when we're looking at every investment, we need to do a benefit cost analysis and also look at what the least cost options are. And my office has been involved in encouraging the deployment of GETS as a potential least cost option, both at the local level here at Pura with respect to the distribution grid investments. While we mostly talk about GETS in the context of transmission, they are applicable also to distribution investments. We have a proceeding at Pura where we've been discussing, we have a few proceedings, but we have a performance-based regulatory proceeding where we have been developing metrics and scorecards and eventually performance incentive mechanisms that will really help us understand better how our utilities are evaluating the opportunities for non-wire solutions, for grid enhancing technologies as compared to new capital expenditures and builds. And I think this is going to be really important to ensure that the right planning is happening. And additionally, within that PBR docket, we're also discussing distribution system planning, integrated distribution system planning in a way that really hasn't been done before in this state. And I think because we have a really hard job of figuring out what that right sweet spot line between investing in beneficial infrastructure and also protecting ratepayers from costs that may not be necessary, the answer to me in figuring out where that right line is planning and transparency. And the integrated distribution system planning docket does promise us better planning and more increased transparency. And we have advocated for specific integration of grid enhancing technology evaluation in that distribution planning. So that's at Pura at the state level. And then just to add on a little bit to what Commissioner Dykes was talking about regionally, we've also been working on efforts to increase transparency and accountability for transmission planning and deployment. Those projects that are approved through the PAC, the asset condition projects that Commissioner Dykes referenced, as well as supporting the planning process for the new transmission build out that is absolutely needed and will hopefully unlock some congestion and help bring energy to the sources that are needed. We're really encouraged, actually, we advocated for, and ISO New England recently incorporated into their 2025 work plan, a specific reference to evaluating GETS as part of the transmission planning process. So we're excited to know that that will be an increased focus in 2025. And, generally think that We do have a lot of work to do going forward, but we have a strong basis to feel optimistic that planning is only going to improve and transparency will improve, and we can leverage all of the data and analysis to ensure that the investments that we do need to make to unlock a truly resilient, reliable grid for customers can be made cost effectively.
Thank you so much. And I think that presents sort of a good perspective of some of the inputs that need to be made, that need to be provided, the transparency, the information, the planning for regulators to make decisions. And we've got someone who's been on both sides of the bench here, and now sits at Pura, and is going to be faced with making some of these decisions. I'm curious to hear some of those perspectives, Commissioner Arconti.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good morning, everybody. So gonna level set just a little bit, right, just about what our agency does. The grid, is managed and planned for by the utilities. We provide oversight, review the prudency of expenditures, but the day-to-day management investment decisions are made by the EDCs. So, but how does our agency think about, reliability, resiliency, capabilities of the grid, as we're looking to do, all the modernization that we're talking about here and, resilient infrastructure. So I'm going to highlight 2 dockets that are closed, so I can speak a little bit more freely about them. It's okay. The first one is, docket 220605. And that docket was a result of some legislation the legislature we passed in 2022 that authorized EDCs to build storage systems that specifically to enhance reliability and resiliency of the grid. So in that docket, Pure approved 3 battery storage projects for UI. They're in Bridgeport, New Haven, and North Haven. These are front-of-the-meter projects. And these projects are going to provide up to 16 hours of outage support to critical infrastructure facilities. So we felt, in the legislature, Pure felt at the time, and the utilities, that this was a very good tool to give the utilities to help modernize our grid and to help build in that reliability and resiliency to critical infrastructures that we're talking about today. Second docket, kind of along those same lines, is the non-wire solutions process docket, which was 240808. So that docket solidified the process cycle that is going to begin this year. So that's a newer program that the utilities are going to administer, and it's kicking off in 2025. Very proud of the work that was done in both of those dockets and both of those decisions, as I believe that they strike a good balance. Non-wireless solutions help to defer capital requirements. They provide for flexibility and grid constraints, and also great for enhancing customer engagement. Many other states in New England, across the country, are adopting non-wire solutions. I know New York has had more of a robust non-wire solution program. I know at one point they had the biggest non-wire solution project in the country. I don't know if that's still the case, but we're really looking forward to seeing that process kick off this year, and see all the work that can be done there. And I'm going to kick it back to Jeremy and keep my comments brief to get us back on schedule.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And thank you to all of you. Before we switch to the second portion of our program, Mr. Chairman, any questions from you or members of the committee?
Yeah, I'll start off with one. I can't help but focus on the thing that keeps me up at night lately, which is every time we have a conversation about essential, critical, beneficial investments in infrastructure, we are confronted with the aspect of ratepayer impact. How do we, as government or all those who have interest, connect the dots for consumers so that those who already feel overburdened by their current energy commitments can understand the importance of making these kind of investments, which may ultimately lead to lower energy bills, but also all the other benefits that you've so well enumerated before. What do we need to do in all of our individual roles to make that case?
I'll start. That's obviously a question I struggle with every single day as well. You know, we do know that investment is necessary to achieve long-term benefits and to get customers of energy in a better place, frankly, than they are today. You know, we have a lot of investments that are required to both modernize our grid, to be able to take advantage of new technologies that will enable customers to get better control of their energy usage, will enable customers to use local, reliable energy. You know, there are important investments that need to be made, and yet many of those investments, it takes a long time for the benefits to accrue. And so we're faced with upfront costs that are just not palatable for consumers. And it's it's a difficult issue. I think all of us around the room struggle with, and I think the best thing we can do is focus on the most cost-effective investments, the investments that bring the most greatest net benefit. You know, I know that when we evaluate different programs before PURA, my team and I constantly push for thorough comprehensive benefit cost analyses to be able to really inform and assure consumers that if they're being, with the hope that if they're being asked to contribute funding towards investments, that they're doing so because they're going to benefit them in the end. So that's sort of how I look at it. I mean, I do, I'm scarily approaching the point of parenthood where I'll soon be funding my daughter's college tuition. And I've kind of made the analogy to myself, college is a really expensive endeavor, right? But so many of us across the world figure out a way to do it because we know it's going to put our children in a better place, in a better position going forward for the long term. And I tend to approach, these needed investments in the same way. And of course, hope to defray the costs as much as possible to customers through federal funding, through state funding, through, any ways that we can offset costs and ensure that those investments that we're asking ratepayers to pay for are truly going to benefit them. That's sort of
That's
my
a great
outlook.
answer, and I love the analogy. And I'll just add, even though I hesitate to do so, sometimes we have to use the other tactic that is often very effective with humankind, which is some measure of fear, which is what are the costs of not doing some of these things that we may have a short-term benefit, but in the longer term, we will pay, and we will pay in a variety of ways. Again, I hesitate to come down hard on people who are already burdened, but I think sometimes they need to hear it. You were going to say something, Commissioner?
Yeah, I think that I'll just add that we've been very focused on cost containment and fair cost allocation in every way that we can. We know, for example, I'll start with a couple principles. The more we can get federal money to pay for some of the transmission upgrades that we need, we need to maximize every opportunity. The New England states came together and we secured $389 million under in federal funding under the bipartisan infrastructure law to support infrastructure upgrades, including to a substation at Montville to better integrate offshore wind and so on and so forth. So that's an example of states working together to maximize money that the ratepayers don't have, but to supplement ratepayer investment. Number two, ensuring that Connecticut ratepayers aren't paying an unfair share of the costs needed for integrating new supply resources, including the transmission interconnection process. So again, reaching that historic agreement among 6 states to share in the costs of funding the reliability aspect of any transmission needed for public policy goals is absolutely historic and ensures that we are not going to be in the situation that we've been in too often, where Connecticut, by virtue of pursuing these proactive investments in new energy supply options, had to pay 100% or an unfair share of those costs. And I think that speaks to a really important framing here where different states have different public policy goals around renewables or nuclear or, whatever it may be. But all of those those sources of generation, while they may meet an RPS or a carbon standard, they are also contributing to support the reliability of the grid. And to the extent that they do so, the 6 states have agreed, including New Hampshire, which does not have these clean energy goals, have agreed that we should all be paying our share for the transmission needed to interconnect them. I think leveraging competition is another really important element, and that's part of the RFP that the ISO is implementing. This was the dream of Order 1000, is to ensure that we're getting the benefit of multiple developers being able to compete to bring their best and most cost-effective projects forward, so that the ratepayers can be assured that the dollars that are being spent are delivering highest value. So those are a few, we can go on, but of the elements that we're incorporating in every aspect of new transmission investment. But having transparency, right, is so critically important. Transparency as an element of oversight, so that we have the information to be able to assure the ratepayers that as you're seeing that transmission portion of your bill increasing, that we have been doing our job to ensure that those projects are needed, and that they are and those dollars are being well spent. The last one I want to mention is supply chain. So we have seen, in so many aspects of infrastructure in this country, very significant increases in the cost of components, and the transmission sector has certainly been experiencing a lot of that. So a lot of the increase in costs, we know, is because the components are not available. It could be a 10-year wait to get, some of the components we need for HVDC substations, for example, for offshore wind. So the states have, what can we do about that? Well, in some ways, the states have been working on that. We have been participating in a Northeast States collaborative on transmission with Mid-Atlantic, PJM, and New York and New England states, in part to say, can we try to create more uniformity in the types of components used across the 3 grids, so that we can minimize some of the supply chain challenges, right? We need the federal government. I think this is a great opportunity for the federal government to also step in, to think about how federal funds could be used to help anchor the type of supply chain investments needed to bring down the cost of these components, which that's beyond the utilities' control. But I just want to share a few of those because the pain in terms of these rate increases are real, and we need to. I hope that as people, to the extent that people pay attention to this, that we have a good story to tell about all these different strategies that we've been using to try to keep costs down.
It's a great point. We need to make sure we continue to tell the story of our successes. And it sounds like a business opportunity for somebody to jump into the supply chain opportunity. Representative Foster.
I really appreciate all of you for joining as panelists today. And I think that this is an important springboard conversation for conversations I hope we'll continue to have throughout the session. As we think about GETS sort of moving forward, I feel myself sort of like stuck in this paradigm, and I'm hoping you can help me elucidate what policy levers are available to us. So we have like this Supreme Court precedent of Hope and Bluefield that guarantees the opportunity to recoup investments that are made. And we could require or ask or encourage the utility companies to be making investments into the grid related to GETS. But my understanding is that like we haven't appropriately leveraged, or we don't really know to the extent to which we can require that GETS achieve sort of the maximum return on investment for the cost of the investment of the technologies. And sometimes people colloquially talk in the energy space about like smart versus dumb meters, and how you could try to deploy AMI or a technology like that, and you can get the full maximum potential, or you can leverage some of the opportunities, but not all of them, but still make a very similar investment in the cost of deployment of a technology. And my curiosity is what policy lever might be available to us as we consider deploying GETS in the future to guarantee that an investment in these technologies, and any technology that might come forward to us, which we don't know now, would be able to be deployed, that the investment would be maximally capitalized on behalf of the ratepayers, in particularly thinking about the ratepayers' investment with a very distinct and separate consideration than the shareholders' investment into those technologies. And like, do we have a schema for that appropriately? And what should that look like when we get there?
Sure. I think, I think the PBR docket is, attempting to address, Representative Foster, a lot of those issues that you just touched on. Again, it is an open proceeding, so I have to tread carefully on it. But, I will say, the agency is working on they did issue a straw proposal months ago. The agency is working on a straw proposal 2.0. And just kind of touching on that and Claire's transparency comments, in part of that in that proceeding, we are in considering public facing dashboards to kind of improve upon the transparent planning processes of the utilities, and helping with the education and the benefit, explaining the benefits of these potential capital investments the utilities want to make in the grid, and how they will directly benefit the grid, and then trickling down to your constituents and everyone in Connecticut. And I think those publicly facing dashboards will be helpful for customers, but also for folks like yourselves who communicate with your constituents daily, in whether it's either pointing them to it or just sending information out in the newsletters, just being another resource for information to help decipher and explain kind of what's happening, and explaining to them the benefits they're getting from all of these investments.
I'll just briefly add to that. Sorry, did I cut you off? I'll just add to that. I mean, in terms of your question about what we're allowed to do within the sort of constitutional framework of rate regulated utility monopolies, I certainly think there is room within the law to be able to effectively encourage strategic investments like GETS. And to Commissioner Arconti's point, we are exploring the best way to do that through the PBR context. But that's critical, right? We have successfully shifted the conversation analysis from, what are we paying our utilities back for, what investments, to, what investments should be made that most benefit customers, that customers should be paying for. Really thinking more in a more focused way about achieving all of the goals that will benefit the customers and the state. And I think we're working through that process, and likely to see, my hope is that we'll have a better framework soon to be able to pursue that.
Fazio.
Commissioner Dykes's remarks kind of sparked a question. We talk so much about the the coming shortages we'll see of generation, especially in New England. And you mentioned adding transmission from New York in particular. We've talked a lot about transmission potentially from Hydro-Quebec, but my question is, should we be talking more about transmission from NYISO or PJM? I mean, I'm sure that they will be dealing with more stress to their supply and demand too. And we saw the capacity market spike in PJM, for example. But I would be surprised if their imbalance, supply and demand imbalance in the future, could be nearly as difficult as New England. So, to what extent, we talk so much about adding new generation in our region, and we talk a little bit about reducing demand, but we don't talk that much about importation from NYISO or from PJM in particular. And I'm wondering if, obviously that entails transmission, but I'm wondering to what extent that is a feasible solution to our future supply and demand imbalances in New England.
Well, I think your question embedded the answer, which is, at least in the near term, those two regions you mentioned are facing critical supply, shortage challenges on the near term horizon. probably in the nearer term than we are with the data center builds out, the PJM, capacity auction. So building more interregional transmission in the near term may mean New England exporting. I'll also note Canada. So we've long in this building talked about, the benefits of importing cheap hydro from Canada more as a base load, sort of always on, resource. So enhancing that kind of an interregional tie. But Canada may be another example where that they've built out a lot of manufacturing and data centers to take advantage of that cheap hydro. They have and so in addition, extreme weather events have caused droughts that are causing them to reserve some of their hydro capacity. So we've actually seen that we've been exporting from New England to Canada in the shoulder seasons here in New England in ways that we weren't previously. The promise of interregional as we look ahead, and I'll just take the Canadians as an example, they're still interested in building more interregional ties to New England. But what they view is they have an eye on the pace of renewable build out and offshore wind build out in New England, thinking that if we're building out more offshore wind in our region, they could import that at times when the grid is oversupplied and the value of that energy is low, and effectively store it in Canada, and then be able to send us Canadian hydro at times when our prices are at a peak. And so I think that's a good illustration of what the benefits of interregional ties will be into the future, to the extent that we can create better economic and reliability matches between times of to moderate price increases at certain peak times, and better extract value from variable energy resources and so on. So in that standpoint, I guess the answer is interregional is still looks very, very valuable, and like it will provide a lot of benefits. But that is contingent on all of our regions just soldiering on and continue to build new sources of supply. And if we do so, interregional can help provide complementary benefits to extract more value from the supply that we're building.
Well, imagine once we annex Canada, how that will affect us.
Yes, the 51st state.
I was going to make that exact same joke, but I thought it was.
Somebody has to do it once a day. We are running a little bit over, but we're going to indulge Representative Gauthier for a moment, because we understand he has a very brief question that will,
Yes,
as per Jeopardy, be
direct
formed in the question.
Yes. Thank you. I'm Representative Nick Gauthier, 38th District. I just have a question about kind of putting two pieces of information together. So you had said earlier in this meeting that near the majority of the cost on ratepayers' bills are transmission costs. And then, no? 40%, 47%?
Not the majority, about 40%
Yeah.
on Eversource bills, a little higher on UI bills for transmission
Yeah.
and distribution
Okay.
together.
Okay.
And then the
So earlier in our committee meeting, we heard that under Groton and Norwich Public Utilities last year, they actually decreased rates for their customers. And just kind of putting those two pieces of information together, I'm wondering how, because they must have transmission costs and they have costs to maintain their infrastructure too, how under, say, Groton Public Utilities, they're able to decrease rates in a year in an arena where it seems that rates are only massively increasing. Thank you.
I'd love to take a rain check and do a little homework. I suspect some of it has to do with the energy supply costs of Groton as compared to those that either were through standard service procurement or the third-party suppliers here. There are some other differences in the ways that Groton pays for infrastructure and programming, but I want to make sure that you have a detailed response. So happy to follow up on that.
I will also say, because we often hear, whether it's Wallingford or some of the other munis, right? A comparison between them and sort of UI or Eversource rates. So not speaking to what is driving a decrease for Groton, but I'll say just generally, it's a bit apples and oranges. When you're talking about municipal utilities that have a very dense urban, relatively urban service territory versus like a company like Eversource that has an obligation to serve out to Barkhamsted. So when you think about vegetation management and the cost for maintaining distribution lines out to more rural customers, the average cost to serve customers, I mean, just as a general matter, will be larger. But a lot of details there. What I'll leave to the folks involved in the distribution rate regulation.
For another time. Representative, one thing I can assure you is that there will probably be bills introduced that are asking us to contemplate alternative models that might actually benefit ratepayers, and we will be open-minded about that. So coming attractions. And Jeremy reminds me we're running a little bit over now, so it's time for us to move to the next section of our conversation.
We're going to transition to the sort of industry conversation moderated by my colleague Kat. But before we do that, I wanted to remind folks that there is a lunch next door in the cafeteria following this to continue the conversation in a more informal basis. So without further ado, Kat Burnham.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. Kat Burnham. I'm the Connecticut State Lead for Advanced Energy United, and I'm really glad to be here. As Claire said at the top of the program, this is a topic that should unite us. GETs and advanced conductors and other solutions. This is what we're looking for. We heard a lot of the problems and challenges in our current energy system. And what gets me up in the morning is that we do have real world solutions. And so I don't want to rehash too many of the definitions. I appreciate Commissioner Dykes giving it, thorough example of what are GETs and advanced conductors, but I want to turn it to the industry folks to help us talk about them in practice. Advanced transmission technologies, or ATTs, are an umbrella term that think about a range of different devices and software and technologies. Why don't we start with Dan, if you could talk to us about what makes advanced conductors advanced compared to traditional conductors, and where are you seeing them deployed?
Thank you, Kat. I was wondering when we'd get a chance to discuss these 600 successful case studies before 1 o'clock rolls around. A little background, Beckart is a global manufacturer in steel wire transformation and coatings. In the early 2000s in Van Buren, Arkansas, we started manufacturing our high tensile strength steel cores for advanced ACSS conductors. And now we're actually iterating into what we call giga strength. It's a really cool term. So giga strength steel. This type of technology offers increased capacity, efficiency. Efficiency is measure of line loss, and then reliability and sustainability. So after this, we can get into more details on each of those topics. But I'd like to touch on one study by the Department of Energy called the National Transmission Needs Study. And all that we've been talking about in this meeting and the previous energy committee meeting is the need for capacity and what's that growth going to look like. So the Department of Energy said that by 2035, there's going to be a need for a 414% increase in interregional transmission lines. Commissioner Katie touched on the interregional term before. And the other interesting study is by the ISO New England on their 10-year fiscal year study. They quoted 18% need for capacity growth by 2033. So a really great source that's out there for all of us to look into is from the Idaho National Laboratory, part of the Department of Energy. They created an advanced conductor scan report. And so they surveyed 44 major U.S. Transmission utilities. And of those 44, 95% of the utilities have deployed or plan to deploy ACSS, which is your aluminum conductor steel supported ultra high strength steel cores. The widespread use of this advanced conductor is attributed to its previous 50-year track record with technology was called ACSR, which is your aluminum conductor steel reinforced. So it's a similar technology, but we've increased the strength of the steel, allowing for more aluminum. And that's what we're trying to do here, is get as much aluminum up in the air as possible. So one of those 600 successful case studies that I'm going to talk about today, I'll mention two quick. So in 2021, Northwestern Energy, who services 750,000 customers in Montana and South Dakota, took a 20-mile section, 100 kV line between the cities of Great Falls and Two Dot. It was constructed using the ACSS trapezoidal wire MA5 conductor, which is your ultra high strength steel, and a product that received national media attention. The primary motivating factors for this project was wildfire prevention. So they chose this advanced conductor to help with wildfire prevention. They also noted that increased efficiency, which provided more value to utility and the ratepayers. It was estimated that if the 105-mile line was replaced with all of this new advanced conductor, the total savings could be as much as $440,000 per year. So this is a very reputable source, the Idaho National Laboratory, that has a variety of major successful advanced conductors in use, and it's a site that we could all go to get that. The second project that I'll mention, and we can talk about the other ones at another time, but in 2003, Evergy, who services Kansas and Missouri, performed a live line reconductoring using ACSS on a 32-mile line, replaced the traditional ACSR conductor, and achieved the cost savings within 14 months of that project. So there's a variety of other opportunities, and we all need to utilize what's been successful out there.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. It's great to hear about projects in practice in the ground and understand that there are efficiency gains to be had. There's real dollars to be saved, and that these are working solutions. And there's different types of advanced conductors out there. It's great that there's many tools in the kit, so to speak. And so I want to turn it to Theodore from CTC Global to talk about another variety of advanced conductors. And Theodore, can you tell me a bit about what are some of the benefits that you're seeing, and tell us again, what makes these conductors so advantageous to enhancing the grid and helping us make it more efficient and effective?
Sure, Kat, thanks. So I'm happy to talk about this. I think this issue is huge. So Chair Steinberg, representatives, senators, commissioners, council, thanks for having this discussion today. I've spent a career around transmission. I was at ISO New England for 15 years, doing all things regulatory around transmission planning and interconnection and operations, worked for a transmission developer and renewable energy generator. I came to CTC Global because I see this issue as so acute and existential for everything we want to do in terms of energy policy, in terms of reliability, in terms of economic growth. There's a lot of manufacturing and other growth in Connecticut. And transmission is the element that you need to make all of that happen. And we talked a little bit about what are the costs if you don't do that. You start to run into issues like fuel security costs, Connecticut paying for 100% of certain options to keep certain things around in terms of resources to meet reliability or policy. Transmission really can unlock a number of benefits. So I'd like to talk about that in New England specifically, where I've lived for 20-something years. There was a study in 2020 that ISO New England did, and this was a study I requested with the company I was with at the time. It was an economic study. And it was if you integrated 8 gigawatts of renewable energy resources, so these are price takers in the wholesale market, you would cut the production cost of electricity in New England by 50%. You would cut it in half. And that was incredibly significant. The other finding of that same study by ISO New England in 2020 was you would reduce carbon by 1/3. And that didn't scale because of transmission constraints. And it was hard to get to the 8 gigawatt part that had a number of assumptions behind it. So I went to CTC Global because these issues are so significant. A few words about what CTC Global is. We are the largest manufacturer of carbon composite core advanced conductor in the world. Dan talked a little bit about steel core conductors. I'll show you sort of like what I'm talking about here. So the way you support conductors is you have a core to the conductor. This is ACSR or ACSS. It has a steel core conductor, and then you wrap it in aluminum. This provides structural support. The aluminum moves the power. CTC makes the carbon core. It's a carbon composite core, and then you wrap it in aluminum. It's much lighter. It's really strong. And you can double capacity in an existing right of way. You can reduce line losses by about 30 to 40%. And as opposed to 7 years, 8 years, 10 years in the planning process for a new line, this has a deployment of around 12 to 24 months, although it's even faster. We just did a project with Tenant in the Netherlands. That started in September. We saw capacity increases in November. It'll be completely done by May. That went from 2,500 amps to 4,000 amps. It's live line. It's 380 kV. They have a little bit quirkier kV, so someplace between 345 and 500 in the U.S. for that sort of project. And this is important because the issues that we're talking about in terms of consumer costs and reliability and economic growth, the thing you can't get around is time. I mentioned I was at ISO New England for 15 years, and many of those tariff provisions I worked on are still there. It takes a long time. We worked on Greater Boston starting in 2008. I think it was fully energized in 2021, to give you the sense of the scale. And that's why you see folks like Microsoft saying we're going to repower a 3 Mile Island reactor. When that's your fastest, cheapest, best choice, that tells you, where things are. So with this conductor, the carbon composite core, and other companies also make carbon core conductors, the conductor heats up. Steel has a reaction to heat. This is why ovens and your stovetop works. It gets hot. As it gets really hard, it gets pliable. It starts to sag. And so that creates a thermal limit of the line. Carbon has an inverse reaction to heat. It doesn't care about heat. In fact, it gets a little bit stiffer. So it has a lower amount of sag to start with. It's a higher tension. And that means when it gets really hot, it doesn't really go anywhere from the carbon part of the line. And that allows you to move a lot of power. It also allows you to use shorter towers, and that saves a lot of costs for consumers because towers and foundations are really where you see a lot of project costs. So as I mentioned, we've deployed around 125,000 miles of this around the globe. And it's been deployed in the US as well, but often to solve particular problems. And a lot of what you'll hear is, an ACCC is what this is called. Oh, that's more expensive. But when you look at a project cost, whether it's asset condition, as Commissioner Dykes mentioned in New England, a lot of those have rebuilds because you want to put up bigger conductors that are heavier. I have to put up a new structure, or my old structures are in bad shape. When you're using something like this, your sag is lower. You're saving like 8 feet or more off a tower height. And that actually works out to somewhere between 2 to 13% cheaper costs, project basis of even an asset condition project costs. When you're talking about doubling capacity with an advanced conductor in an existing right of way versus building new lines, if I'm doubling the capacity and I'm avoiding a new line, that's a 75% savings for consumers over doing it. And I'm getting the 2 times capacity. I'm getting 30 to 40% less line loss, and I'm getting the wildfire mitigation of the lower sag. So Dan, I mentioned, some case studies. I think that's incredibly useful. I'll give 2 really quick ones, Kat, and then we can get into some questions around it. So one I'll mention is AEP did a project in 2016. This was in Texas at 240 circuit miles. It's about 1,500 miles of ACCC. It doubled the capacity. It reduced line losses about 30%. It was done live line. It was the EEI project of the year that year. It's next to the Gulf of Mexico, and it has a non-corrosive effect when we use the carbon. So this will be in service for many more years than if it was a reactive type material. And that even just the energy savings, putting the capacity increase aside. So Dan mentioned efficiency. Reducing line losses by 30% equated to saving $15 million a year just in energy costs. And it was the equivalent, just doing that one transmission line, of adding 34 megawatts to the grid. And if you need sort of an analogy to think about it, think of an LED light bulb versus an incandescent light bulb. You remember those used to be really hot. I remember as a kid, I burned myself on an incandescent bulb a couple times. It's why the Easy Bake Oven works, because it's giving off heat, right? So if you are operating at a much cooler temperature and a carbon conductor operates at a much cooler temperature, you're saving a tremendous amount in terms of heat. And heat is just electricity going into the air. If you improve it by 30%, that's like adding a 34 megawatt generator to the system just by replacing the line. So that was one example. And the other example I gave, I mentioned about the Netherlands on the timing. That was another live line example. But we have those projects around the world, again, doubling the capacity of it. If you think about New England and you think about costs to consumers, going back to that ISO New England study, if you are integrating low cost or zero bid cost generation, that's an immediate cost benefit to consumers. But it's also moving power around the system to really start to solve things like your fuel security issues, which is really spiky. In 2017, 2018 winter, we had fuel security issues. We had a cold snap, you might remember. It lasted 15 days. The price of natural gas spiked, and we added $1.6 billion, right? We talk about the cost of transmission, $1.6 billion, not amortized over 40 years like a transmission line, but amortized over that year in additional natural gas prices just to deal with, our current resource mix at the time and some of our lack of transmission capacity, being able to move power around at the time. So new transmission can be cost effective with even what we're talking about today, but it really can start to unlock some significant consumer savings going forward. So it's one of those things where if you're spending money, you can often save significant amounts of money given the way wholesale energy markets work and some of the things we need to pay for if we're not doing it to ensure reliability.
Thank you, Theodore. Yeah, I think savings is a word that is appreciated by everybody in this room. So it's very encouraging to hear that these are technologies that can move more power through the lines. It can help us integrate more renewables and also offer real savings to ratepayers. I think that's the type of solutions that we're looking for. So just, again, going around the room, next I want to turn it to the utilities, looking at the folks at Eversource. Grid enhancing technologies, or GETS. This is something that is really important topic in our neighboring states. We heard, Massachusetts is prioritizing it, and Connecticut is thinking in earnest about how do we integrate or consider these resources. This morning, we've heard a bit about concerns about load increases. So I wonder if you can talk about how you're thinking about future investments and how you're going to meet future customer needs, but also do so in a way that's balanced. How are you thinking about GETS in your toolkit, so to speak?
Thank you so much for that question, Kat. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to go very fast here.
I appreciate brevity.
Yep. But we did hand out some slides. I'm gonna talk about them quickly. But to your point on slide 2, the most important takeaway here is there is not a separate planning process for grid enhancing technologies. They have always been incorporated in the transmission system planning process during the solution development phase. It's been like this for decades, and that's why some of the examples in the slides that I hand out, we've had GETS in operation for over 40 years. This is something we've always looked at. We continue to look at it. We continue to evaluate. That's the key takeaway on slide 2. I heard this morning that the definition of GETS is broad. I was actually happy to hear that. I mean, this is one of the problems with GETS is because it's, yes, 10 people. You get 10 different definitions of what's inclusive in GETS. But the more prescriptive it's made, we believe it should be broad for that reason, because there's an important aspect of it. Many of the definitions you see about GETS focus on improving system performance. We believe that omits a really important factor, and that is also just the direct benefits to customers. We have examples in these slides of, I believe if you were to ask our customers, of other types of GETS you might not typically think of that are directly providing benefits to customers. So those are advantages as well. There's a table on slide 5. The only purpose of this table was because FERC, and I used to work for FERC for 6 years, so I can give them a hard time, but FERC kind of confused things when they came up with advanced transmission technologies because just by definition, just inherently having the word transmission in it makes it even more limiting. The purpose of slide 5 is just that many of the gets that are evaluated, the transmission system actually can be applied on the distribution system as well. And this is exactly what we do at Eversource when we're evaluating grid enhancing technologies. We look both at the transmission system as well as the distribution system. Now, this table was created from the lens of transmission. That's my role, transmission system planning. Distribution has a lot of other grid enhancing technologies that are not on this table. But I do want to call out one on this table as a cautionary tale. FERC, via Order 881, mandated ambient adjusted line ratings. What we are seeing now through compliance in New England is that actually that order is going to result in a reduction in transmission line capacity in certain months. So gets are best evaluated on a case-by-case basis, looking at the specific need and the specific fact pattern of that project. And to make it even worse, right, most of you'll probably aware, right, New England eventually, all indications are we're going to switch to a winter peaking system by 2035, and those are the seasons that we're seeing a reduction in line ratings resulting from ambient adjusted line ratings mandated by FERC Order 881. So it's something to be careful of. The other thing I kind of wanted to highlight here is, you know, in terms of designing a cost-effective and efficient solution, totally agree. These projects, though, by definition, innovative technologies, they can be risky, right? So something that we certainly want, and there are examples of this, right, where new investments in bleeding edge technology have been abandoned. That must be avoided. That is worst case scenario. So using the expertise from the utilities to understand which solution to deploy in which scenario is key. That's the key takeaway on slide 5. I'm just going to quickly walk through a couple projects. I'm going to try to do this in a minute, but I guess I should offer. Thank you for inviting the utilities to this forum. I sincerely appreciate it. To the extent that anyone would like to do a deep dive on any of these projects, anything I'm saying here today, please reach out to Eversource, because it's just important to understand how much work is happening in this space already. So be eager to do that. Please let me know. On slide 7, you see a very successful non-wires alternative in Massachusetts. It's called the Provincetown Battery Storage Microgrid. Everyone's talking about microgrids. We're doing microgrids. And why? Because the alternative to this was a very expensive, relatively very expensive distribution plus transmission line solution. So here we have a 25 megawatt, 38 megawatt hour battery. It's been in operation for years, and it's using grid forming inverters. A lot of research going into grid forming inverters. Here we have a system in operation that can go fully islanded for over 10,000 customers. So when they're there, and this has happened, when there's a system contingency that would otherwise result in them going dark, this battery storage, which is the largest storage-only microgrid in the country, can fully serve those customers like nothing happened. Now, this project, which we've published industry papers on, won industry awards on, was massively complex to make this thing work. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to cover all the reasons why, but it was tremendously complex. I'm going to skip over some slides just to try to leave the other members of this panel some time. But I do want to touch on advanced power flow controllers that you see on slide 10. This is another important one because the word advanced always gets kind of introduced in this discussion on gets, but advanced is not always better. And power flow controllers is a perfect example of that because of physics. So how advanced power flow controllers work is different than how other non-advanced, and I'm using air quotes, work. Advanced power flow controllers modulate line impedance by injecting a voltage 90 degrees out of phase with line current. And so they're essentially modulating the line impedance. Other power flow controllers alter the voltage angle, which allows potentially an entire reversal of power flow. So but we have projects that are proposing to use advanced power flow controllers, to be clear. So we are using, but if you see a project using a non-advanced power flow controller, it might be because of physics and no other reason, because they simply operate differently based on the laws of physics. So I wanted to kind of talk about that example. We do have a dynamic line ratings project that is going to be installed this summer. Very excited about it. It's in southeastern Massachusetts. We got DOE funding for this as well. It's a partnership with the University of Connecticut. What's great about this is we're going to be able to monitor and optimize and analyze the deliverability of offshore wind that's interconnecting on the Cape. So we did get DOE funding. Very much agree, Commissioner, that seeking any source of funding is very important. I'm going to touch on Huntsbrook Junction, which you were alluding to earlier, in a second. Quickly on conductors on slide 12, very important here that our standard conductor that Eversource uses is a high temperature, low sag conductor. So nearly every single transmission reconductoring project we do is doubling and tripling line ratings already. Almost every single one. So we are absolutely deploying high temperature, low sag conductors in every opportunity we can get. I'll quickly talk about the slide. Oh, there's no number on this.
I wonder if we can come back to that. I want to be respectful of other folks in the room because I'm looking at the clock and we're about to hit up on lunch. So I appreciate those remarks. I want to turn it to your colleague next to you, Bob from Avangrid. What are you thinking of in terms of deploying GETS and also getting it right? That has been a theme. Is we want transparency. We want to have the right solutions to these problems. What is your team thinking about with these resources?
Yeah, excuse me. So thank you for the opportunity to participate today. And, we do look forward to further collaboration during the legislative session. So regarding GETS, GETS are a significant investment. So what Avangrid would prefer is if we're to embark on any of these technologies, that there is some level of assurance of cost recovery and full cost recovery. Investments are becoming increasingly more expensive and difficult to finance under the current regulatory environment, which has led to across-the-board credit rating downgrades. As of late last year, UI's ROE is running at less than 3.75%, causing us to prioritize projects really to focus on delivering safe and reliable, our core mission of safe and reliable service. And I could reference one of our New York projects where we have dynamic line ratings installed, similar to our partners at Eversource. So this funding was obtained through NYSERDA, so there was no utility outlay for incremental funding for this project. It's on two 230 kV transmission lines that are highly congested. And we are seeing benefits of an increase in the average rating of about 15 to 20%, about 80 to 90% of the time. So there are times, as Eversource stated, right, the rating actually goes down, at the extreme temperature periods. So we are right now just collecting data from that trial. The plan is to operationalize that data in the coming months. It's a 36-month project. In Maine, we leveraged DOE GRIP funding through the Maine Governor's Energy Office. They put a portfolio of projects together between CMP, Central Maine Power, and Versant Energy. And we received about $30+ million worth of grant funding for our portfolio of projects. And one of those is dynamic line ratings. Another is active network management to do grid flexibility for resources. And the other is to implement some StatComs.
Great. It's really interesting to hear the examples from Maine and Massachusetts and New York, and I look forward to the examples for here in Connecticut. I just want to round us home to my colleague, Zach, who works with coalitions and does to just round out the program. Obviously, there's so much to say. I'm pleased to have so many stakeholders at this table and policy leaders because we're eager to dig in further. But Zach, can you tell us what happens if we maintain the status quo? Rep. Steinberg referenced that there's a real cost and we're leaving real value behind. Can you speak a little bit about what happens if we don't prioritize grid enhancing technologies, GETS, or advanced conductors or other forms of ATTs? What would we in Connecticut miss out on?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to have the last word at this roundtable. I appreciate all the comments from everyone else, and I think there's been a lot of level setting that's already highlighted, I think, what could be left on the table. I think the biggest thing is probably speed at this point, and we're focused on a transition for climate change and a clean energy transition, electrification. There's many different transitions happening. Economic growth tied to load growth, all of those things require the building of new energy infrastructure. And we need to be looking at the solutions that can happen in the near term, in the 1 to 3 years. Theodore was talking about reconductoring that expands transmission capacity. That can happen in 12 months even. And then specifically for some of the grid enhancing technologies, we're talking about adding capacity. It is dynamic, so it's not necessarily firm, but it is additional capacity that's getting added in 6-month time frame. And so those things, like, I think that's one of the biggest things is really that speed represents benefits for consumers.
Absolutely. We need solutions right away. I want to, thank our panelists and, appreciate your time and want to acknowledge there will be, lunch to continue these conversations informally in the private room of the cafeteria. I'll turn it back to our chairs to conclude the roundtable.
I don't know about you, but this just has sort of wetted our whistle here. I wish we had twice as much time to get into some of these specific project details. I want to encourage everybody who's participated and those who also have interest to continue to engage the committee. These are things we need to talk about in the context of what we want to do this year. They don't require legislative solutions in many instances, but we want to be supportive and be able to facilitate the good work you're already doing to maximize our capacity and our efficiency. So I would hope that as we have subsequent meetings with each of you, that we build in some extra time to talk about some of the things we talked about today. And I only want to apologize for not affording you sufficient time to be able to speak as if you were not an auctioneer at any last words? No. All right.
I just want to thank everybody for coming and participating. Great information.
And I understand that there is lunch for select individuals over at the private dining room.
Reception.
It's called a reception. Let's do that. But in any case, thank everybody for participating. I want to again thank Representative Foster for getting us started. We tried to do this last year and then we got snowed on. So again, till we next talk about this, really appreciate it. What a great way to kick off the Energy and Technology Committee this year. Thank you.